Good evening. Welcome to the show. This is Cillianmurphy. Welcome back to the basement. Welcome back to the basement for the last time. This is the last show. Normally I would say, oh, time has flown, hasn't it? But as we all know, time has been behaving very weirdly over the last few months. It seemed very loose and very unmoored. It seemed to have sped up and slowed down of its own volition. The last few months of 2020 were like an overly long outro of a song you never want to hear again. But now we've made it and we're here. We're in 2021 and we still have 2 more hours to go before the end of the show. Lots of music. We're going to have one final songs from Under the Stairs. We're going to have some poetry. In fact, we started the show this evening with poetry. You heard Robert Frost reading his own poem, Acquainted with the Night. That was from Robert Frost Reads His Poetry. Robert Frost won 4 Pulitzer Prizes. 4. He was probably the most famous poet of his time. And underneath that poem, you heard Monoton. And the tune was Ein Wort. And Monoton is Austrian artist Konrad Becker. And that was from an album called Blau, which is a re-release of a 1980 Monoton album. And then after that, you heard the amazing, the beautiful, the very much missed Elliott Smith with Between the Bars. That was from Either Or. Oh yes, this next piece of music. When I heard this first, I thought it could work very, very well on a Tarantino score. Or maybe playing in the background on a jukebox in a diner in a Coen Brothers movie. This is music from the 1960s. This is the Paris Sisters with Be My Boy. See what I mean? Let's stay in the 60s now, and we're going to have some music from Henry Mancini. This is Moon River with Audrey Hepburn doing the vocal, which is from the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is based on the novel written by Truman Capote, who also gave us In Cold Blood. I'm not one of those people that always says the book is better than the movie, but sometimes it is the case. And this song, the lyrics were written by Johnny Mercer, and it was almost left out of the final edit of the film. But Audrey Hepburn stepped in and intervened, and it ended up winning an Oscar for Mancini and Mercer. Anyway, it's a beautiful thing. She's Got You by Patsy Cline. That was from 1962. That's 3 songs in a row from the 60s there. That was from Patsy Cline's 3rd studio album and her final album, because she died a year later in a plane crash, aged only 30. What a loss. Isn't that a sad, sad story? Let's ask Miranda July to cheer us up after that. This is the last show after all. Right, what do you say, Miranda? That was the sound of Gorky Zygotic Monkey with Patio Song. That was from 1997 from the album Barafundle. Great Welsh band. I should say the Miranda July that you heard earlier, she has a film out right now called Cillian, which I've seen, and it's very, very good. It's very unusual and very Miranda July. It's got great performances from Evan Rachel Wood and Gina Rodriguez. So you should track that down if you get a chance. We're going to have some more music from Wales now. This is the Super Furry Animals, and this tune is powerful enough to get you through any dark January evening. Beautiful, beautiful guitar playing there from Bill Orcutt. A track called Odds Against Tomorrow. That was the title track from his album, which was released in 2019. And it takes its title from a 1959 Robert Wise movie, a film noir. Kind of has that noirish sound to it, doesn't it? That piece of music. So back in 2015, I went to Somerset House to see, well, it was an art installation called Recording in Progress. And it was PJ Harvey in a glass box. It was like sort of one way you could see in, but you couldn't see out. And she was recording her album, The Hope Six Demolition Project. And it was a fascinating experience because the audience could stand outside and look in as she went through her creative process. And to see a creative process like that laid bare, you realize that it's effectively like a laboratory of ideas, much in the way a rehearsal space is in a theatre. But these spaces are generally private spaces, and they're away from the rest of the world, and they're sort of a space where time stands still. Like if you notice in recording studios, there's never any windows because reality is cancelled in these spaces. So it's fascinating for me to see that convention subverted and to make it so transparent and accessible to an audience. And the record she made from it is amazing. So I'm going to play a track from the album, but before you hear that track, you're going to hear Polly Harvey herself talking about why she doesn't, very sensibly in my opinion, discuss her lyrics. Isn't that a mighty track? That's PJ Harvey with Community of Hope. Now it's time for the very last songs from Under the Stairs. This is the last time we're going to hear this gloriously excruciating ident.
Songs from Under the Stairs.
So the track I've picked this week is from Frank Zappa. Now, I've said many times in interviews and on the radio that I am a Frank Zappa fan. I should probably qualify that. There was a period from my mid-teens to my early 20s where I was completely fascinated by Zappa as a musician and as a person, because he was such an amazing contradiction and he was so fearless and so rigorous. A few facts about Zappa. He never drank, he never smoked, he hated hippies, he hated dropouts, yet he became famous during that period in the late 60s and the 70s and kind of got lumped into that movement. In my mind, he's one of the greatest guitar players of all time, but who also happened to be a self-taught composer. He was an advocate for free speech, for education, for political participation, for the abolition of censorship. In 1988, he had registration booths at his concerts. Another Zappa fact, he was friends with Captain Beefheart since they were at high school, and he produced Trout Mask Replica, Beefheart's iconic record. And I remember seeing him on the BBC for the first time in about 1993, 1994 with my brother, and that was the beginning of our obsession. And we used to play cassettes of Zappa in the car on long journeys with my poor parents at turned up to 10, and my parents, in fairness to them, never asked us to turn it down. Zappa's output was phenomenal. He put out 113 studio albums in his life. Now, not all of it was for me. I kind of loved the novelty, funny stuff when I was younger. I'm not really into that now. And I could never quite fully get my head around the avant-garde orchestral stuff. I'm just clearly not that sophisticated. But I love his instrumental guitar pieces, particularly earlier albums like Hot Rats, Waka Jawaka, Overnight Sensation, Apostrophe. And here's what I think. I think we will always need artists that are brave and uncompromising. And if they happen to be a genius, then that is a bonus. And I reckon Zappa was all three of those things. Now, before you hear this track, you're going to hear some archive from the man himself on why he became a musician. And then you're going to hear Sofa Number 1, which is from One Size Fits All. So the Six Music album of the year from last year, 2020, you've got to get used to that. It's gone. Thank goodness, was from the band Salt. Now, I'm not going to play you a track from that album. They put out 2 records in 2020. So this is from their album Untitled Rise, and this is a track called Strong. I'm going to play you some John Coltrane. I'm going to play you A Love Supreme, which I think is probably one of the great jazz albums of all time. I don't think many people would argue with me on that. The album comprises 4 suites: Acknowledgement, Resolution, Pursuance, and Sam. I'm going to play you part 1, which is Acknowledgement. So this is my claim to fame. There's 4 players on this record: John Coltrane, McCoy Tyner on piano, Jimmy Garrison on bass, and Elvin Jones on drums. And I got to see McCoy Tyner in Ronnie Scott's many years ago, and I got to see Elvin Jones playing in Dublin many years ago. So I feel like I've seen half of the players on this record. Before we hear A Love Supreme, we're going to hear John Coltrane himself from the archive talking about exploring musical possibilities. I heard a great story about when John Coltrane and Miles Davis were playing together. You know, Coltrane would go into these kind of trance-like states playing, and he would play and play, and he said to Miles Davis, "Sometimes, man, I just can't stop playing." And there was a pause, and Miles Davis turned to him and he said, try taking the horn out of your mouth. I've always loved that story. Now, to follow John Coltrane, I'm going to play you some Alice Coltrane. Alice Coltrane was John Coltrane's wife, and she replaced McCoy Tyner as a pianist in the Coltrane band when he left. And she's an amazing artist in her own right, of course. She's collaborated and performed with people like Ornette Coleman, Pharoah Sanders, Jack DeJohnette, Santana. The piece I'm going to play is called Spiritual Eternal, which was the opening track on an album called Eternity, which came out in 1976. I feel like we should listen to some talk now. It feels like it's the right time to do it. This is from their album Laughing Stock. This is Ascension Day. That was the sound of Italian composer Teo Teardo, and that was a track called Underwater Constellations. I've had the pleasure of working with Teo Teardo several times in theatre. He works very closely with Enda Walsh, who is a good pal and collaborator of mine, and Teo has composed the music for 3 plays that I've made with Enda. He's an insanely talented composer. And that piece, Underwater Constellations, that came from when Teo was asked to make a score for 3 movies by Man Ray from the 20s. So let's have some more movie music. I'm going to play us something composed by Krzysztof Komeda. Krzysztof Komeda was a Polish composer and jazz pianist. He wrote the score for many of Roman Polanski's movies, including Rosemary's Baby. The piece of music that you're going to hear from this evening is from a Polanski movie called Cul-de-sac, and this is Walk in the Water. That's a song that'll make you cry, isn't it? That's Tom Waits with Train Song. My friend Barry Ward once said to me, Cillian, that is the greatest song ever of all time. That is from Frank's Wild Years from 1987. Now, we started this series of shows with a poem from Benjamin Zephaniah, and I'm very pleased to say we're going to end this series of shows with a poem from the amazing Benjamin Zephaniah, and this is Naked. That is my favourite Massive Attack song, definitely. That is him at the big wheel from Blue Lines featuring Horace Andy. Before that, you heard some music from Ireland. That was Saint Sister with a track called The Place That I Work, and that features Lisa Hannigan. That is a very, very beautiful piece of music. Now I thought I'd play some music from Tricky, who obviously was a very close collaborator with Massive Attack back in the day. This is from Tricky's most recent album from 2020. The album is called Fall to Pieces, and this is a track called I'm in the Doorway featuring Oland. And Tricky said of this track, with most of my stuff, there's nothing else like it around, but with I'm in the Doorway, this is my version of pop music, the closest I've got to making pop music. The next piece of music I discovered on a mix by Tom York. This is from an artist called Casa Overall. There's a track called Please Don't Kill Me from his album I Think I'm Good. It's just got me. See what you think. Do you remember that band Chairlift that were around in the early 2000s? Well, Caroline Polachek was one half of Chairlift, and she's been making really interesting music since Chairlift were no more. And this is from her 2019 album called Pang, and this is a track called Insomnia. She's got an amazing voice. Has to be Björk. That was Björk with Harm of Will from Vespertine, which came out in 2001. And before that you heard System Olympia with the cover version of the Mazzy Star track Fade Into You. That was from an album called Four Down, which came out in 2019. So a couple of weeks back, I played you some music that came out on Erased Tapes, and I couldn't say anything to describe the music other than that it's excellent, because that is the whole point of these releases. They have no name, no description, no band, no album cover. It's just at the beginning of the track you hear a little bit of Morse code, and then you hear this magnificent music. I mean, I do kind of have an idea of who that might be. He's an Erased Tapes artist, just saying. Now, normally at this time of the evening, I would pick more contemplative, quieter tunes to kind of ease us out into the night. But since it's the last show, and since we're in 2021, I thought I'd play some more upbeat, screw you 2020, bring on 2021 music. So we're going to finish with 2 tracks that I think will get us going for the new year. The first track is interesting because you're going to recognize it instantly, but it isn't what you think it is. So I'll tell you more afterwards. I never knew that Happy Mondays track was a cover. That was new to me. So when I heard that, I went, oh, that sounds really like the that's the original. That was John Congo's with a track called He's Gonna Step On You Again, and then the Mondays changed it into Step On. The story of the track is, in 1990, all the current artists at that time who were on Elektra were asked to cover old artists on Elektra. So The Cure did Hello, I Love You by The Doors. Billy Bragg did a track by Love. Metallica covered Queen. And the Mondays decided to do this track, which Paul Oakenfold produced, and that's how Step On came about. Now, guys, this is where I leave you. This is the end of the show and the end of these run of shows. Thank you so much for keeping me company in the basement for the last, well, it's been 12 weeks. It's been 3 months. I really appreciate it. It's kept me occupied and reasonably sane. I want to say a big thank you to Angela Davis, my producer on this, but she's been more than a producer. It's kind of been a joint effort and a collaboration between myself and Angela, all done remotely. Isn't that amazing? And I want to thank everybody at 6 Music for making this happen. So here's to 2021. Hopefully we'll catch up at some time then. I'm going to leave you with some positivity from Primal Scream. Take care.